My second presentation here is on expanding the toolbox focused on the upland forest management, parallel to what Kyle's just been talking about in the riparian areas. Again, this is the study design. We have these three scales, strategies that again are the two alternative approaches with the standard and control. And I'm going to jump into now the 7 upland prescription treatments. And just keep in mind, there's, as Teddy just mentioned, there's an hour in the afternoon where we can go into even more detail, because this is going to be limited. This is going to be a fairly quick presentation as well. So again, this is the design we ended up with. I don't think I need to go over that again. Let's jump right into the complex early seral treatment. So why are we doing this? Well, the principal reasons are there's a clear decline in the area of early seral conditions, particularly in coastal Oregon and Washington, on all ownerships. And there's research output that suggests that there's a decline in animal associates of this particular seral stage. That includes insects, including pollinators, birds that feed on insects in particular, but other plants, berries and so forth, ungulates, as well as one of the questions we're asking in the study is whether early seral conditions contribute to the fish food chain. So the objectives of this prescription are to generate revenue for the trusts as mandated, at a level somewhat lower than we would have if this was a standard variable retention harvest, standard DNR regeneration harvest. The goal is to extend the time and space for early seral species and structures in a passive way, largely to provide habitat for those species, minimize post-harvest costs, possibly reducing the need for pre-commercial thinning, perhaps, we're not sure. The prescription is to do a regeneration harvest, but leave more trees / snags and logs. There will be some amount of planting if necessary to maintain minimal levels of stocking, but it will be different kind of planting so that we can assure we have this extended time and space. And there will be a somewhat longer rotation. And we have various learning goals identified. I'm going to try to go through these quickly. The second upland treatment is called accelerated variable density thinning. And this is one of the layouts we're contemplating doing in one of the watersheds over about a 40-acre area. And the objectives are to continue revenue production at substantially less than a variable retention harvest, but more than the standard DNR variable density thinning prescriptions. And relative to that, we want to see if we can speed up late seral habitat faster by doing some wider thinning to something like 40 trees per acre, favoring the long-lived conifers. And by doing this, we are also creating an option for DNR to, if they are in need of replacement late seral stands, or this may revert to a variable retention harvest after 20 years or so. The idea is to go with somewhat larger gaps, 2 to 3 acre gaps. And as I said, thin more widely in certain places, thin less heavily in others, and have skips and so forth to reduce large amounts of wind throw, but it's some amount of wind throw is actually part of the idea of this prescription. The next one I want to talk about is the Ethno Forestry and variable density planting prescription, and this one's evolved over the last 4 or 5 months. And we've settled on the idea that we might be able to clump crop conifers together in a way that will extend the time and space for early seral species and other culturally valuable species, also elk habitat. And this is a real focus of what we would like to achieve here, to produce as much, produce volume for the trusts, but also extend the time and space, particularly for elk forage. This may also reduce our management costs. And let me explain this one a little better in a couple ways. So here's one. We're actually considering 3 options, and one of the options is to put in a clumping study. And here's an area of 1 of 4 across the study that would actually put in a variety of different kinds of clumps. And I'll show you a picture of that in a second. The objectives to produce similar amounts of revenue, increase these benefits, and also increase heterogeneity by having this variety of variable of clumping designs and essentially variable density planting. We'll get maybe talk more about that in the afternoon session. One of the keys is going to be how we manage the vegetation between the clumps, and so that's a challenge we face. On first of all, we want to make sure the clumps produce conifers, but we also in the interstitial areas we want to increase elk browse and cultural species of interest. And the clumps themselves will look. This is our current set we're considering, from 3 tree clumps 4 feet apart to 4, 5, 7, and 36. These clumps, the 3 tree clumps, would end up being about 19 feet apart. The 36 tree clumps about 67 feet apart. All of these will have about 350 planted Douglas fir per acre. And the initial space to clumps and intervening areas ranges from 30 to 50 for clumps and 50 to 70 for this interstitial, which will close rapidly as the trees grow. And the last one I want to roll out for you is a cedar alder polyculture prescription. And so why did this one come up as something to consider? Well, first of all, both cedar, red cedar and red alder, the areas of forest with these species has diminished, at least for alder since the mid 1900s. For cedar over a longer period as well. They don't fit in the short rotation conifer culture mode, which has dominated the management of the forests in the peninsula. Yet, and associated with that, there's been a big decline in manufacturing for the hardwood industry. They're struggling mightily to get alder volume. The shake mills have been struggling to get cedar for a long time. Yet the prices for both of these species have, for the most part, remained substantially above Douglas fir. And yet they have very high cultural values, very high habitat values, and they maybe work really well together. And for those of you who are not familiar with the effect of alder on soils, this is an aerial photograph of the Wind River. It's actually a fire break that was planted in 1933. It was actually planted to Douglas fir, and then 4 years later, they planted alder in between the Douglas fir. And this is in about 2000, and you can see this big green stripe across the landscape from the stream to the ridge. The alders are long gone, but the effect on the Douglas fir was just stunning. The site index went from 84 to 105. It's just, in certain situations, alder can have phenomenal effect on the soils. So this is how it would look. And one of the options.
Bernard, you have, sorry to interrupt, you have a minute.
Thank you. Well, one of the options we're considering, and we'll go through the options later, is to do what's called a replacement series, where we have different ratios of cedar to alder, from pure cedar to pure alder, and things in between. I'll just show you this height curve, which you're probably familiar with, which suggests that we could take advantage of early alder growth. And I failed to mention the idea here is to have 2 rotations of alder to 1 rotation of cedar. So a 35-year alder rotation, you go in, remove the alder, replant, and then at perhaps 70 years, you come in and harvest both of them again.